Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be continuing our read through of this book called History of the World Map by Map. And if you're new to this series, welcome. But if you don't know, I am reading this book blind. All the books I read on my channel I have read beforehand, just so I am aware of how I want to present it, if there's any parts I don't want to read, how to pronounce things properly. But this I'm going in without having read any of it. I've only read the titles of the pages. So let's look at our next 3 maps of the medieval world. I believe it's particularly mostly Europe. So we are starting off with the 100 Years' War. And let's see what we have here. Let's start with box number 1, Origins of the War, 1154 to 1337. During the reign of Henry II of England, his realm included large areas of France, although by the time Edward III came to power in 1327, these had been reduced to Gascony alone. Edward, who was related to Charles IV of France, refused to pay homage to the French king for Gascony and also laid claim to the French throne after Charles died, leading to war. So all of this dark pink is held by England at the outbreak of war in 1337. So this part here. And these salmon colors under English influence at outbreak of war at 1337. So here. I see Gascony there. Interesting. Number 2, let me try to slide this over a bit as far as I can. There we go. The Cressy Campaign, 1340 to 1346. I'm going to move my microphone too. I sound a little bit distant. How's that? Is that better? I think that's better. In 1340, Edward engaged the French fleet off Sluis, I guess, defeating it conclusively. Later, he also sent forces to Bruges and Brittany, but the expeditions were inconclusive. In 1346, Edward returned with a larger army, which, equipped with longbows, crushed the French at Cressy. These purple arrows are the campaigns of Edward III during this time. So we can see he came in here near Cherbourg, and came in to Poissy, up to Cressy, where we had the battles. And battles here. This way, the battle up here at Sluis. Never heard of that place. I assume it's in Belgium or the Netherlands now. Not sure. Next, we have the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360. Sorry to correct it. Conflict resumed after a hiatus during which the Black Death was rampant throughout Europe. In 1356, the Black Prince, the son of Edward III, won a major victory at Poitiers, during which King John II of France was captured. Edward III himself soon returned to France, unsuccessfully laying siege to Rheims. England and France negotiated a treaty at Bretigny in 1360, under which England received more land in southwest France and a large ransom for King John II of France. So the yellow swords here are battles during this time. I don't see any though. Yellow swords. Okay, maybe when I look closer I'll find it, but I don't see any. Okay, the yellow here is land gained by England after the treaty, which is all of this. Marche here is the little exclave. And then the dotted arrows is Edward III, so that's this here, coming down, down, down. to Bretigny. And the solid is the Black Prince. So we're moving down this way to Bordeaux, down to Toulouse, down to the coast, and then back up to La Royale, and up to Romorantin. Never heard of that place either. Interesting. I still don't see any yellow swords. Do you see any yellow swords? It would have been... I don't see any yellow swords. I don't know what to say. Alright, then we have the French Ascendancy, 1369 to 1389. The Treaty of Bretigny did not establish lasting peace, and in 1369 Charles V of France declared war again. Charles fought ably, using guerrilla tactics and avoiding major pitched battles. Despite years of campaigning by Edward III's heir, the Black Prince, who became sidetracked in a war with Spain, the English were driven out of areas they had gained in the treaty. So now you have these bluish, purplish battles, which you can see right here in La Rochelle. And I guess, no, could we see the one before? I'm very confused. I don't see any other battles. But the dotted line there is areas that remained under English control. So it looks like just this region here, from what I can see. Interesting. But we have more. Even more war. You know what? Let's read all the little boxes on this map, actually, before we go to the next one. So here, 1340, Edward III destroys the French fleet, giving him control of the English Channel. That's its least English Channel, I meant to say. 1356, the Black Prince defeats... I just had a hiccup. The Black Prince defeats and captures King John II here, but up. There we go. Found it. Sorry to anyone who was yelling at their screen about where it was. I found the yellow swords. Finally, I found Waldo. 1372, Castilian fleet helps to break an English siege of La Rochelle, the first major English naval defeat of the 100 Years' War. And then down here it says in 1335, the Black Prince launches a series of raids, devastating much of southwest France. That's all this down here. Let's head on to the next map. I'm glad I found those swords. That's what happens when I don't read through. I just literally don't know what to expect. Number 5, the Agincourt Campaign, 1415 to 1420. Now I know in French that's Agincourt, but in English I've heard this Agincourt and Agincourt. So I don't know which one it is. I'm just going to go with Agincourt because that sounds like the most American English way to pronounce it. In 1415, Henry V of England resumed the war, sailing to France and besieging Harfleur. At Agincourt, he won a victory in which the French knights were decimated by English and Welsh longbowmen. Henry swept through northern France, and by the Treaty of Troyes was recognized as heir to the French throne. The blue arrows is the campaigns of Henry V. You can see coming down here and then going back up here through Calais. And the blue swords are the battles right here at Agincourt. Next we have English consolidation from 1420 to 1429. The 1420s began with setbacks for the English, including the death of Henry V from dysentery on campaign in 1422. Even so, the English, led by the Duke of Bedford, consolidated their hold on northern France, helped by a Burgundian alliance occupying all the territory between the Seine and the Loire. Finally, in 1428, the Earl of Salisbury struck at the strategic town of Orleans. Alright, the dotted white arrow is Henry V. The solid white arrow is the Earl of Salisbury. So we can see Henry V came down from here and it was around like the Paris region here, but the Earl of Salisbury came in and went there, and there, and went to Paris. This light pink is the possession of the House of Burgundy. In 1429, you can see Artois, and there's Burgundy. And the dark pink is held by England or Burgundy in 1429. That's very fake, but we have Gascony down here and all this area over here. Next we have Joan of Arc, 1429-1431. In 1429, the English besieged Orleans, one of the last French strongholds. The arrival of a peasant girl, Joan of Arc, who claimed to have received divine messages that France should resist, inspired the French under Charles VII to fight back and recapture much of the north. Joan was captured by the Burgundians and burned at the stake, but English dominance of France was broken. So Joan of Arc is this gold arrow coming up from here all the way up to there. I assume she was captured. And the battles here are the yellow swords. Right there. I think there's one right there. I can't tell with all the arrows. Then we have the end of the war, 1435-1453. In 1435, the Burgundians broke off their alliance with the English, who then lost control of Paris. During the 1440s, most of the rest of northern France was reconquered by Charles VII, until the English held only the areas around Bordeaux. A final defeat at Castillon led to Bordeaux's fall to the French and the end of the war. And we have some dark swords there. Talk about those battles. I can see one right there. There's probably more, but let's read through the map and maybe I'll find some more. That worked last time. Here at Agincourt, in October 1415, Henry V defeats the French army. A large proportion of the French nobility is killed. Here at Compiègne, May 1430, Joan of Arc is besieged by the Burgundians. What else do we have here? In 1429, a decisive defeat at Patay by the French leads to the English loss of northern France. 1428 to 1429, the siege by the English is lifted after Joan of Arc encourages Charles VII to counterattack. And then over here at this battle, 1453, the English commander, the Earl of Shrewsbury, is defeated at Castillon, leading to the loss of Guyenne and Gascony. Yeah, I think that's the only battle then. Very confusing with everything going back and forth between the French and the British. Or the English, I should say, at this point. Very confusing, but another one of those wars that went on for way too long and just ended with how everything was before. Next, we're going to look at medieval European trade. Look at this map. Now, this is a doozy of a map. What is happening here? Let's pick this apart. Our first box is over here. The growth of towns from 1100 to 1358. Rapid economic development meant that by 1300, Milan, Genoa, Naples, Florence, and Palermo had over 100,000 inhabitants, and Paris perhaps 200,000. Many towns developed governments or merchant guilds, but increasingly, crowded towns bred political unrest, disease, and intolerance. Urban populations became restive, with major uprisings in Flanders in 1348 to 1359, and Paris in 1358. So a town with a population over 50,000 is marked by this kind of like eggplant colored dot. So let's see, we can see Bologna, there's Milan, Florence, Barcelona, Granada, or else Rouen, London, there's Bruges and Ghent, else is any down here? You got Constantinople, Palermo. Nice, quite a bit, right? Quite a bit. Next box is way down here. I'm gonna have to make this crooked for you to see. Fairs and local trade from 1100 to 1300. During the 12th century, large trading fairs were established in Germany and France to cater to the growing number of long-distance merchants. The greatest of all were 6 held annually at 4 locations in the county of Champagne. The weight system used at Troy was accepted as a universal standard in Europe. So I get to see this little mark here. It looks like a little cart or a little food truck or a little food stall. Is an important fair. And look how many there are. They are all over here. Look at this. All down, I assume these are like maybe rivers. This must be the Seine, right? So many down here. There's one up here. Looks like Boston. And Leipzig, Frankfurt, Nuremberg. There's Milan. So many in France. My goodness. But good for them. Important fairs. I like that. Oh, there's one over here in Guimarães in Portugal. Okay, gotta slide this over and then make it crooked for you to see. Box number 3. Banking. 1100 to 1500. In the early 12th century, Italian merchants began to finance their ventures through bills of exchange. Banks specializing in providing this credit emerged, such as the Peruzzi and then, most prominently, the Medici from 1397. By the late 15th century, the Medici had been eclipsed by competitors who had grown rich on lending to the Austrian Habsburgs. So the Peruzzi company is noted by these little green coins. We can see them all over the Italian peninsula. There's Naples, Barletta, Arcona, Rome. What's this? Bologna. And I see some up here. I guess that's Troy. And London. Any in the Iberian? Yep. And Girona. Lots of banks. Oh, down here in Palermo as well. And Tunis. Wow. Oh, and then down here, we've got Rhodes. We've got Famagusta. Wow. All kinds of banking systems. Very exciting. It is interesting. It's just not exciting. Let's see what we have next. We have Jews in medieval Europe, 1100 to 1492. By the 12th century, there were large Jewish communities, around 100,000 in Germany and France. Jewish merchants gained a high profile from money lending and, combined with their status as religious outsiders, this made them vulnerable to prejudice. Jews suffered legal restrictions and massacres, especially during the Crusades and the Black Death, and by 1492, were expelled entirely from England, France, and Spain. So regions that had significant Jewish populations in 1200 are gold here. So we can see we've got pretty much like all of Portugal, this whole chunk of the Iberian Peninsula. We've got southern France, Provence. We've got central France there. Lots of Germany, Austria, Czech region there, some Polish region, some Balkans there, Sardinia and Sicily are just completely filled in. And then we have up here in the Baltic states and England, and it looks like part of Wales here. Mostly England. But yeah. And then what's the other one? Expulsion of Jewish population with date. I'm not sure what that is, but we've got down here 1497, 1492. These were like the famous ones. We got France 1308, England's 1290. We've got Sicily in 1492 down here. Don't see any others. But yeah. Really interesting time where, like, the European Jews here were, like, very, very rich. And then they would face, like, extreme persecution. But that's kind of the Jewish story, isn't it? Number 5 is the Venetian Empire from 850 to 1500. Venice first became a trading power in the mid-9th century and soon afterward established bases on the Adriatic. By the 14th century, the Venetians had surpassed their longtime rivals in Genoa and gained land in the Aegean from the Byzantine Empire. But rivalry from Spanish, Dutch, and Portuguese merchants helped cause the collapse of their empire by the 16th century. So Venetian possession in 1400 is this really pretty purple color. So of course we have Venice here. But then we have this whole coastline here and a bunch of little islands here in what's now Croatia. And then they have, oh goodness, further down here in Greece they've got Crete. They've got a bunch of islands here, part of the mainland. Venice in its heyday was like unbeatable. Principal Venetian trade route are the purple dots. So we've got, let's see, all down the Adriatic, of course, all the way down to Alexandria, Acre, Beirut, Famagusta, all the way to Baghdad here. We've got trade to Tripoli, Tunis. I think, nope, we've got, this is purple, to Palma here. And then it looks like this is purple too. Oh my goodness. To Lisbon, and then up to Bruges, it looks like. Wow. And then we have the Genoese Empire from 950 to 1409. The port of Genoa began its rise to prominence as a maritime power around 950 and became the center of a trade network that encompassed North Africa and the western Mediterranean. Defeat by Venice in the War of Chioggia dented Genoese aspirations, and in the early 15th century the city fell under the sway of the Visconti of Milan. So Genoese possession is this reddish color. So we can see they got Corsica, and there's Genoa there. They've got some of the coastline. And then their trading routes are just out of this world. I mean, not really, it's Europe. But most of Europe here, we've got all down the Mediterranean, all around Sicily. There's Tunis. We've got over to Beirut. Yeah, I guess Venice wasn't Beirut. They've got Acre though, but Genoa had Beirut. And then up here through the Dardanelles and all of that by Constantinople, they're trading along the Black Sea coast and even further, it looks like. My goodness. And they're also going all the way to Bruges as well, around Western Europe there. And all these towns here on the African coast. Very extensive network. Meanwhile, in the north, we have the Hanseatic League from 1265 to 1669. In 1265, a group of towns agreed to meet annually to discuss common business. They soon grew into the Hanseatic League, containing up to 200 towns. The league grew powerful enough to enforce its will on states. The 30 Years' War and increased Dutch competition broke the group's dominance, and its council last met in 1669. So the green dots there are members of the Hanseatic League. So it's tons of towns up here, and then we have got Stockholm, Visby up there. But like, so many. It looks like they got Bruges as well. I didn't know that. And then their trade routes, of course, are all up through the Baltic Sea and through the North Sea up to Bergen there, Norway, down here to Lincoln, and all around Denmark, Danzig. Wow. Like, it looks like this is green as well. We got the word there. Yeah, look at that. Cologne. Didn't know Cologne was in the Hanseatic League. That's so far south from what I thought. I really just thought the Hanseatic League was like over here and over here. Like, I didn't realize it went so far south into the mainland. That's incredible. I think that's all the big boxes, so let's read the little ones. Let's start over here in 1492. The expulsion of Jews pushes communities to North Africa. Up here in 1281, Church Synod forbids Jews from holding public office. 1127, Guildhall, first mentioned as craft guilds, become organized. 1137, charter first granted for a fair by the Duke of Champagne. Where else? Let's go up to, actually, there's one more up here in Lincoln, 1225. 18 Jews executed after being charged with a ritual murder. Yikes. 1265, treaty with Visby forms the basis of the Hanseatic League. And this is here in Lubeck. And 1669, Hanseatic League Council meets for the last time. 1370, treaty allows complete freedom of trade in Germany for Hanseatic merchants. They're in Stralsund. What else? 1349, Jewish population is expelled after being blamed for the Black Death. How sad is that? They're in Frankfurt. What else do we have? What else? What else? There's so many boxes. It says late 15th century, population of Milan reaches 85,000. Here in 697, the first Venetian Doge elected. That's their word for duke. 1345, looks like Florence. Collapse of the Bardi and Peruzzi banks. 1378 to 1382. Ciompi uprising of urban laborers and artisans not represented by the guilds. In 1397, the Medici Bank was first established. That's definitely Florence. What else here in Western Europe? 1349, Venetians inflict major naval defeat on Genoa. 1132, city of Pisa receives political rights over villages in its environs. And I think that's it. There's some over here, though. We have 1182, Venetian merchants massacred during a riot due to their domination of the city's maritime trade. Holy moly. Up here it says New Sarai, at present day Kolombov Khan in Russia, is one of the largest cities of the medieval world. Wow. It's somewhere over there. And there's some boxes down here in Jerusalem, looks like. No, Damietta. 1218 to 1219, Genoese fleet besieges Damietta as part of the Fifth Crusade. And in 1492, here in Cairo, it says many Jews expelled from Spain settle in North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean. I think that's it. What an interesting map. This is a map that I could look at for a really long time. But I have one more map to show you of this time period, and it is about the Black Death. Dun, 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 dun. Let's start with our origins in China in 1331. Chinese historians kept records of plagues as far back as 244 BCE. They noted symptoms similar to those of bubonic plague in an outbreak in 642 CE. The Black Death probably began in Hebei province in 1331, where it killed up to 90% of the population and hastened the end of Mongol rule in China. Holy moly, 90%. I'm sorry, this is just an observation. Why do so many viruses begin in China? I mean, I know it's because there's a huge population, so statistically it happens, or there's large populations. But, like, I can think of, like, 4 viruses that started in China. Not all of them, of course. Like, not every virus in the world. But, like, anyway, number 2. Spread through Central Asia, 1330s. A series of poor harvests, earthquakes, floods, and swarms of locusts, all of which weakened the population, was followed in 1338 by an outbreak of plague around Lake Isyk-Kul to the west of China. Whole communities died, and from there the Black Death spread westward along the Silk Road trade routes toward Europe. How sad is that? Imagine a whole community succumbing to bubonic plague. It's so sad. Number 3 says the Black Death in the Middle East from 1335 to 1348. The Black Death reached Persia by 1335. It spread from there to the rest of the Middle East, affecting large, crowded urban centers such as Damascus in Syria and Cairo in Egypt, particularly badly. The famous Moroccan scholar Ibn Battuta reported 2,000 people a day dying of the disease in Damascus. My goodness. But then it gets worse. The plague in Europe, 1346 to 1347. By 1346, the Black Sea port of Kaffa came under siege by the Tatars, a Mongol group, who were keen to push out its Genoese garrison. According to some sources, the Tatar army became infected with the plague, and their commander, Khan Janibeg, had the corpses of dead plague victims catapulted inside the city. How Mongol of them. Soon the Genoese caught the disease too, and sufferers on a ship fleeing Kaffa transmitted it farther west. Then its arrival in Italy, 1347 to 1348. Genoese refugees from plague-hit Kaffa brought the Black Death to Italy in late 1347. From the ports where the victims landed, including Venice, which lost 3/4 of its inhabitants, the disease spread inland. Thousands of bodies were thrown into communal graves. In Florence, many of the banking families who had made the city prosperous went out of business. If you don't have customers. And number 6, the Black Death reaches Britain, 1348 to 1350. The plague traveled farthest and fastest by sea, so Britain and other maritime nations were affected before inland northern and eastern Europe. The plague entered Britain in July 1348 and reached London 6 months later. Crowded, filthy streets made ideal breeding grounds for plague rats and their fleas. About 40,000 people died, half the city's population. My goodness. So none of those boxes had little things to point out, so we get to explore the map together. Let's, I guess, go backwards in time, starting over here in Britain. Actually, we're going to Scandinavia first. It says 1349. Plague spreads into Scandinavia, carried by ships from England to Bergen in Norway. January 1348, plague arrives in North Italian ports and spreads throughout Italy, Anatolia, and the Balkans. Oh, that's pointing to Genoa. Good to know. I thought it was going to point somewhere up there. Spring 1347 in Kiev. Plague reaches the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. Oh, it's not pointing to Kiev, it's pointing to Constantinople. It goes past Kiev. Constantinople, and spreads to western Anatolia and the Balkans. 1346, the Tatar siege of Kaffa allows the spread of the Black Death. That's where Kaffa is. What else do we have? We have Egypt over here. 1346. Between 10,000 and 15,000 people die each day at the height of the plague in Cairo. My goodness. And then over here in Mecca, 1348, pilgrims performing the Hajj to Mecca carry the plague into Arabia. I hadn't even thought about how the Hajj would spread the plague. Oh my goodness. Wow. 1347, plague breaks out in an army besieging Tabriz and sweeps through Persia. It's Tabriz. What else? This is another map I could just look at. Because you see the arrows here is the spread of the plague. And it's got years attached to it. So let's see what's happening over here in China. It says in the 1330s, major outbreaks of plague occur in western China. And I think that's it for boxes. Look at Burma there getting hit. Okay. Yeah, you don't really hear about like Aden, Jeddah, Mecca. You don't really hear about that Marrakesh way over here. You can't see anymore. You don't hear about those stories. Like when you think the Black Plague, you think Central Europe, you think Italy and England. Also, when I hear the plague, I think of the film The Seventh Seal, which is a Swedish film, which takes place during this time. So I think of Sweden. You don't really think about North Africa and the Middle East, or even like Southeast Asia. These lines here, what's that? They are Arab trade routes. So all the little lines here are showing like the Silk Road and all the other trade routes that the plague just pretty much followed all the way to these major population centers we just talked about on the last page. And you know, viruses love populations. Yeah, I watched The Seventh Seal during lockdown, and that was it was like a completely different movie during an actual pandemic. It was very bleak while watching it during a pandemic. I cried during part of it. But that's a really great film. It's very artsy, but it's a very great film that kind of captures like the terror that people felt at that time. Just the fear of the unknown, right? They didn't understand what was happening and why them, you know. Very, very scary time, but very fascinating map here. You can see the progress through China here. That's so interesting. Let's see, next I think we're going to head into the Holy Roman Empire. That's pretty cool. The Ottomans and the Reconquista. We're heading into kind of the late medieval period. That's when I think European history gets really interesting, but I know there's maps coming up too of like the Americas and Africa and stuff, so we can look forward to that kind of interesting stuff next time. At least I think so, because I don't read this book in advance as much as I want to. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good